Good evening to everyone listening to me now. A special greeting from the owner of this channel. I hope you enjoy this week's stories that many would prefer to forget. I hope you like it. The Loma Larga Tunnel. My name is Carlos Mendoza. I'm 35 years old and I've been working as a rideshare driver in Monterrey for almost 5 years. I live in a simple apartment in the Mitras Centro neighborhood, where I've lived alone since my divorce. Before all this happened, I was the most skeptical guy in the world, the kind who laughs at ghost stories and apparitions. My work takes me all over the city, day and night, and I was never afraid to take any ride, no matter the time or destination. At least that was the case until 3 weeks ago, when I accepted a ride that forced me to go through the Loma Larga Tunnel at 2 in the morning. Since then, I can no longer drive at night, and I tremble just thinking about passing near that place again. It was an ordinary Tuesday, one of those when the city seems emptier than normal. It had been a slow day, with few rides, and I was about to head home when the app beeped. A ride from downtown to San Pedro Garza Garcia. Good fare for being late at night. I accepted immediately, thinking of the extra money that would come in handy at the end of the month. The passenger was a middle-aged woman who had left work late. During the journey, I mentioned that we would take the tunnel to shorten the way. That's when she looked at me through the rearview mirror with a strange expression and said, "Are you sure? Wouldn't you prefer to go around via the avenue?" I found it curious, but replied that the tunnel was faster. She adjusted herself in the seat, visibly uncomfortable, and muttered something about the stories they tell about that place. I didn't pay much attention to her comment at the time. After all, everyone in Monterrey has heard some crazy story about the Loma Larga Tunnel. Inexplicable accidents, apparitions, voices. Stuff for superstitious people, I thought. I dropped the woman off at her destination, and, as I still had the app on, I soon received another request. A man needed to go from Galerías Monterrey Mall to his home in Country. Again, the fastest way was through the tunnel. When I entered the road that led to it, I noticed there were very few cars, something unusual even at that hour. The yellowish lighting of the tunnel appeared ahead, creating that effect of a dark mouth swallowing the road. As soon as we entered the tunnel, the car radio began to crackle, losing signal as always happens in these places. Nothing abnormal, so far. The passenger was distracted on his phone, and I kept my eyes fixed on the road, eager to get out of there soon, not out of fear, but because that enclosed environment always gave me a claustrophobic feeling. That's when I noticed, from the corner of my eye, a figure standing on the narrow side walkway of the tunnel. I slowed down a bit, surprised to see someone in there at that hour. It was a young woman, dressed in dark clothes, her face partially covered by her hair. She raised her hand as if hitchhiking. "Did you see that woman there?" I asked my passenger. He raised his eyes from his phone, looked around and replied, confused, "What woman?" I looked again, and the figure had disappeared. A chill ran down my spine as I accelerated, wanting to get out of there quickly. I convinced myself that it had been just a play of shadows, an illusion created by the tunnel lights and the fatigue of the long night. I dropped the passenger off at his destination and decided it was time to go home. The problem was that to get to my neighborhood, the most direct route was to pass through the tunnel again. I hesitated for a moment, considering taking the longer way around. How silly, I thought, laughing at myself for letting a simple optical illusion affect me. I turned the car toward the tunnel, determined to prove to myself that there was nothing wrong with that place. This time I was completely alone on the road when I approached the entrance. The lights inside the tunnel seemed weaker than before, some flickering irregularly. I entered slowly, more attentive now to any movement on the sides. The radio started to crackle again, but this time it wasn't just static. There was something like distant voices mixed with the noise, incomprehensible, words that came and went. I increased my speed, feeling drops of cold sweat running down my back despite the air conditioning being on. That's when my headlights illuminated not one, but 3 people standing in a row on the side of the tunnel. The same woman as before, a middle-aged man in old-fashioned clothes and a small child. All looking fixedly at my car, all with the same empty expression, all raising their hands in an identical gesture. I floored the accelerator, my heart beating so hard it felt like it was going to come out of my mouth. The figures quickly passed by the window, and I didn't have the courage to look in the rearview mirror to see if they were still there. That's when I realized something even more disturbing. I should have already reached the end of the tunnel. I had driven through it hundreds of times and knew exactly how long it took to cross it, less than a minute at a normal speed. But I had been driving for at least 2 minutes, and the exit lights weren't appearing. I looked at the speedometer, 80 km/h. I looked at the dashboard clock, 2:47 a.m. When I raised my eyes back to the road, my blood froze. The same woman I had seen twice before was standing in the middle of the lane, directly in front of my car. I turned the wheel by reflex, trying to avoid her. The car skidded, the wheels losing grip on the wet asphalt that I hadn't even noticed before. I closed my eyes, expecting the impact against the tunnel wall, but it never came. When I opened my eyes again, I was stopped on the shoulder already. Outside the tunnel, the engine still running, purring as if nothing had happened. My hands were violently shaking on the steering wheel. I looked at the clock, 3:22 a.m. Somehow, I had lost more than half an hour. I turned on the interior lights and examined the car. Not a scratch, no sign that I had almost crashed. I got out to check the exterior, my legs so wobbly I could barely stand. Nothing. The car was perfect. I got back inside, and that's when I noticed, on the passenger seat, where there had been no one before, was a small antique brooch, the kind women used to wear decades ago. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room of my apartment, staring at the brooch as if it could give me some explanation about what had happened. It was an old piece of metal darkened by time, with a small cameo in the center, showing a woman's profile. I had no idea how it had ended up in my car. I came to consider that perhaps a previous passenger had dropped it, but I always checked the seat after each ride, and I'm absolutely certain it wasn't there before. When the sun finally rose, I put the brooch in a drawer and tried to convince myself that it was all just a hallucination caused by fatigue. After all, I had been driving for more than 12 hours straight. Anyone would have visions after so much time behind the wheel, right? I spent the next day avoiding thinking about the subject, occupying myself with household chores and watching TV. I didn't turn on the app, telling myself I needed a rest. But the truth is that I was afraid of taking a ride that would lead me, and near that tunnel again. At night, exhausted from trying so hard not to think about what had happened, I ended up falling asleep on the couch. That's when I had the first nightmare. I was driving through the tunnel, but it seemed to extend infinitely. The lights flickered more and more, until I was in total darkness. Then, suddenly, my headlights illuminated dozens of people standing, in a row on the sides, all with the same empty expression, all dressed in clothes from different eras. And in the middle of the lane, blocking my way, was the woman from the brooch, her face now clearly visible and identical to the profile in the cameo. I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat. The clock showed 3:22 a.m., exactly the same time I had woken up outside the tunnel the night before. This coincidence disturbed me even more. I couldn't go back to sleep. The image of those people in the tunnel, with their empty expressions and clothes from different eras, was etched in my mind. In the following days, I found myself obsessed with the Loma Larga tunnel. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. I started researching on the internet, looking for any information about that place. That's when I discovered that I wasn't alone in my experiences. There were dozens of similar accounts scattered across forums, blogs, and social media groups, dedicated to unexplained phenomena in Monterey. The legend of the tunnel was older and more sinister than I had imagined. According to the accounts, the Loma Larga tunnel was built in the late 1960s on land that previously belonged to an old colonial farm. During the excavations, workers allegedly found a mass grave with dozens of unidentified bodies, victims of some tragedy forgotten by time. The remains were supposedly removed and buried elsewhere, but many believed that not all the bodies were found, and that some remained under the concrete of the tunnel. Even more disturbing were the reports of accidents during construction. 7 workers died in a partial collapse that was quickly hushed up by the authorities. The incident received very little press coverage at the time. The works were interrupted for just 1 week before continuing as if nothing had happened. Since then, The tunnel has become known for the strange phenomena that occur there, especially after midnight. Drivers report seeing people hitchhiking who disappear when approached. Some say they've heard voices or crying inside the tunnel, even when they're alone in the car. Others tell of distortions in the perception of time. Journeys that should take less than a minute extending for much longer, or clocks that show different times at the entrance and exit. And almost all mention the lights that flicker without explanation, creating that disturbing effect of moving shadows. One account in particular caught my attention. In 1978, a man named Ernesto Vega reported to the police that he almost ran over a woman inside the tunnel during the early morning. According to him, the woman appeared out of nowhere in the middle of the lane, causing him to lose control of the car. Miraculously, he didn't suffer serious injuries, but he insisted that before passing out, he saw the woman approach his car and leave something on the passenger seat. The police never found the alleged woman, and the case was filed as a post-traumatic hallucination. In another case, an entire family disappeared while crossing the tunnel in 1982. The car was found abandoned at the exit, with no signs of accident or violence. The searches lasted weeks, but they were never found. Theories range from kidnapping to planned escape, but no one could explain how a family of 4 simply disappeared inside a busy tunnel without leaving a trace. As much as I tried to find rational explanations for what I had experienced, I couldn't completely convince myself. Yes, I was tired that night. Yes, the tunnel is poorly lit and prone to creating optical illusions. Yes, there is a known psychological phenomenon where people in enclosed environments like tunnels can experience temporary hallucinations. But none of this explained the coincidences, the visceral feeling of terror I felt, or the vivid dreams that continued to torment me. I decided to return to the tunnel one last time, but during the day, with the sun shining outside. I needed to face that place in daylight to demystify it in my mind. Around noon, I drove there, feeling my stomach turn as I approached. The entrance to the tunnel looked perfectly normal, with cars passing in both directions at a steady pace. I entered, keeping my speed at the allowed limit, carefully observing the walls. Nothing abnormal, no mysterious figures, no sense of distorted time. I crossed from one end to the other in less than a minute, exactly as it should be. I felt an enormous relief, almost laughing at my own foolishness. But still something didn't fit. Why did so many people have similar experiences in that place? Was it just suggestion, the power of urban legends over impressionable minds? Or was there something more, something we couldn't explain with our limited understanding of the world? It's been 3 months since that night in the tunnel. I haven't gone back to working as a rideshare driver. I found a job in an electronics store with fixed hours, only during the day. I completely reorganized my routes through the city to never need to pass through the Loma Larga tunnel, even if it means taking longer paths. The nightmares have decreased with time, but I still occasionally wake up in the middle of the night with the feeling of being watched. I regularly follow the online forums where people share their experiences in the tunnel. New accounts emerge almost every week, frightened drivers describing encounters with apparitions, time distortions, inexplicable voices. Some are probably made up, exaggerated stories to gain attention, but others have specific details, nuances, that only someone who has experienced something similar could know. These are the ones that keep me awake at night. I don't know what happened to me that night in the Loma Larga tunnel. I don't know if it was a supernatural experience, an unknown physical phenomenon, or just my exhausted mind playing tricks. But one thing I'm sure of, there are places in the world where the line between what we know and what we don't understand becomes dangerously thin. The tunnel is one of those places. And if someday you're driving through Monterrey late at night, and your GPS suggests going through the Loma Larga tunnel as the fastest route, do yourself a favor, take the longer way. Some routes simply aren't worth the risk. My name is Arturo Vega, and what I'm going to tell you today happened almost 4 decades ago when I was still a young security guard at the famous Casino de la Silla in Monterrey. I never thought I would have the courage to speak publicly about this, but at 58 years old, with my hair already grey and fewer years ahead of me than I've left behind, I feel it's time to share what I witnessed on that October night in 1987. It's not easy to relive these memories. Back then, I was a 23-year-old young man, full of energy with my whole life ahead of me. The casino was an elegant place, frequented by Mexican high society and American tourists who crossed the border looking for entertainment. I lived in a small apartment downtown, and although the salary wasn't the best, I enjoyed my job, mainly because I could observe the city's nightlife without getting directly involved in it. It was on a Friday in October 1987 that everything happened. The sky was heavy with dark clouds announcing a storm that never came. I remember it like it was yesterday. The air was heavy, difficult to breathe, and there was an inexplicable tension in the environment. The casino was packed, as always on Fridays, and I was making my usual rounds between the tables, observing the players and ensuring everything ran smoothly. Around 10 at night, I noticed the arrival of a man I had never seen before. He entered with impressive confidence, as if he owned the place. He wore an impeccable black suit, shiny shoes, and a gold watch that gleamed under the casino lights. Man, that guy drew attention. It wasn't just his elegance, but there was something about him. Something I still can't explain to this day. He had a constant smile on his lips and penetrating eyes that seemed to see through people. The strangest thing is that despite the air conditioning working at full blast, he didn't seem to feel the cold that made all the other customers wear their coats. The man went directly to the poker table, where the most serious gamblers played, and asked to join. The dealer hesitated for a moment, something rare to see, but soon gave a seat to the stranger, who pulled out a briefcase full of chips. I don't know where he got them from, since he didn't go through the cashier. Wow, how lucky that man was. In just a few minutes, he had already multiplied his chips several times. He won hand after hand, with frightening naturalness, as if he knew exactly which cards would come next. The other players began to get visibly uncomfortable, but no one dared to question him. There was something about his presence that commanded respect, or perhaps fear. I continued my rounds, but couldn't take my eyes off that table. It was as if a force pulled me there, forcing me to observe that strange phenomenon. Meanwhile, the casino was getting hotter and hotter, despite the air conditioning. After 2 hours of play, the man had already accumulated a fortune in chips. The players around him were pale, some even in a cold sweat. The casino manager started to get worried and asked me to keep an eye on that mysterious client. I positioned myself near the table, pretending to observe the game in general, but in reality, I couldn't divert my attention from that man. That's when something happened that froze my blood. During a particularly tense hand, the man adjusted himself in his chair and crossed his legs in a carefree manner. At that moment, the hem of his pants rose slightly, and, my God in heaven, what I saw was not a human foot in an Italian shoe. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was having some kind of hallucination. It couldn't be real. What I saw for a fraction of a second were hooves. Goat hooves, hairy with cloven feet in the place where human feet should be. I was paralyzed, not knowing how to react. My heart raced, and I felt a chill down my spine that I had never felt before. I looked around to see if anyone else had noticed, and I realized that the dealer was as pale as paper, with wide eyes fixed in the same direction as mine. Our gazes crossed for a moment, in a silent confirmation of what we had just witnessed. The man must have noticed our reaction, as he immediately adjusted his pants, covering what shouldn't have been seen. He looked directly at me with a smile. That didn't reach his eyes, and I swear to God I saw a red glow in them. "It's time for me to leave, gentlemen," he said in a voice that seemed to echo inside my head. He stood up, collected his chips, and walked toward the cashier. I followed him discreetly, still in shock. As he exchanged his chips for money, the casino lights flickered 3 times. When they returned to normal, the man had disappeared. Simply vanished. He didn't go out the main door, didn't take the elevator, didn't go to the bathroom. He disappeared into thin air, leaving only a slight smell of sulfur. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night. In the following days, the casino was practically empty. As rumors spread quickly through the city, they said the devil himself had visited Casino de la Silla. Some players who were present that night never returned, and the dealer resigned the next day, citing health problems. I continued working there for a few more months, but never felt comfortable again. Every strange noise, every shadow on the walls reminded me of that man and his goat hooves. The manager tried to cover up the case, saying it was just a story invented by frustrated players who had lost money. But I know what I saw. And I wasn't the only one. I talked to other employees who were on duty that night, and many reported strange things. One of the waitresses said that when serving a drink to the mysterious man, she noticed that his shadow on the wall didn't match his body. It seemed to have horns. The valet swore that when the man arrived, his car was hot as if it had come from hell, with door handles so scalding that he could barely open the door. And the strangest thing, there was no record of that vehicle entering the parking lot, nor images on the security cameras. Damn, how that messed with my head. I started having recurring nightmares about that man. I dreamed that he called me to play cards, and when I sat at the table, I realized that the cards were blank and that we were betting not money, but souls. I always woke up at the same point in the dream, when he revealed his true form. The nightmares became so intense that I sought help from a psychiatrist. After that day at the casino, many strange things began to happen. The players who were at the table with the mysterious man met tragic fates. One of them lost his entire fortune in failed investments. Another suffered an inexplicable car accident on the road to Saltillo. A third went insane, claiming to be pursued by an evil presence. As for me, I resigned 6 months after the incident. I couldn't stand working in that place anymore. Every time I passed by the table where the man had been sitting, I felt an inexplicable chill. Customers also complained that that specific area of the casino was always colder than the rest, even in the scorching summer of Monterey. Look, it's been almost 40 years since that night, and I still get chills telling this story. I moved from Monterey shortly after, trying to leave those memories behind. I went to Mexico City, where I started a new life as a doorman for a residential building, a quiet job without strong emotions. But I never entered a casino again. I never even played a game of cards with friends. The fear remained ingrained in me. Sometimes when I'm alone at night, I have the feeling that someone is watching me. And on rare occasions, just before falling asleep, it seems like I smell that same sulfur scent. Casino de la Silla closed its doors in 1995 after years of losses. The building was abandoned for a long time until it was demolished in 2005 to make way for a shopping center. They say that demolition workers found strange things in the foundations, unknown symbols engraved on the basement walls, inexplicable stains on the floor of the area where the poker table was, and an abnormally low temperature in certain parts of the building, even on the hottest days. Some refused to continue the work, claiming to hear laughter and feel invisible presences. The demolition that should have taken 3 months ended up taking almost a year to complete. And the scariest thing is that from time to time, rumors emerge of an elegant man in a black suit who appears in casinos in different cities in Mexico, wins fortunes, and then disappears without a trace. The boy from University Hospital. My name is Lucia Hernandez. I'm 42 years old, and I've been working as a nurse at the University Hospital of Monterey for almost 2 decades. I started as a nursing assistant when I was only 22, freshly graduated, and full of dreams. I lived in a small apartment near the hospital, which made my night shifts easier. In the first years, everything went normally. The usual emergencies, patients coming and going, the fast pace that every healthcare professional knows well. I never imagined that place where science and reason should prevail would become the stage for the most inexplicable experience of my life. It all started on a winter Tuesday, during my night shift in the pediatric ward. The hospital was strangely calm that night. Few patients, fewer emergencies than normal. Around 3 in the morning, I went to check the vital signs of a child hospitalized at the end of the corridor. On my way back to the nursing station, I heard a child's laugh. I stopped in the middle of the hallway, confused. At that hour, all children should be sleeping, and visitors weren't allowed. I looked around and saw no one. Must be fatigue, I thought to myself, and moved on. But then, from the corner of my eye, I saw a quick movement. As if someone had just turned the corner, my breath caught in my throat. I followed the direction of the movement, thinking that perhaps it was some disoriented patient needing help. As I turned the corner, I caught a glimpse of a small child, a boy of about 7 years old wearing blue hospital pajamas. He had his back to me, standing in the middle of the corridor. "Hey, little one, shouldn't you be in bed?" I called in a low voice so as not to frighten the other children. The boy didn't answer, just continued standing there. When I approached, a few more steps, he turned his head slightly, just enough for me to see the profile of his face and a smile. A strange sensation took hold of me, without my understanding why. I took another step toward him and, in the blink of an eye, he was no longer there. He simply vanished. I stood paralyzed for a few seconds, trying to understand what had happened. I ran to the end of the corridor, checking all the rooms, thinking he might have entered one of them. But all the children were sleeping in their beds. I returned to the nursing station with rapid breathing and unsteady hands. My colleague, Carmen, noticed my state and asked what had happened. When I told her, she turned pale. "You saw him," she said, not as a question, but as a statement. "Saw who?" I asked, still trying to calm myself down. My goodness, how I regretted asking that question. Carmen told me that several hospital employees, especially those who worked the night shift, had already seen that same boy in blue pajamas. According to her, he was a patient who had died many years ago, victim of a rare disease. The most disturbing thing is that everyone described exactly the same child, a boy of approximately 7 years old, dark hair, blue pajamas, and a smile on his face. Carmen said that she herself had seen him twice, always in the same corridor, where I found him. "He never harms anyone," she explained. "It seems he just wants to play like any child." After that night, I began to pay more attention to the sounds and movements of the hospital during my shifts. Sometimes I heard childish laughter coming from empty corridors. On other occasions, small objects changed places without explanation. A toy that was on a table appeared on the floor, a ball that rolled with no one around. I commented with other colleagues and discovered that many had similar stories to tell. One of the older doctors told me that once she was making notes in a medical record when she felt someone pulling her coat. When she turned around, she saw the boy in blue pajamas smiling at her. When she tried to talk to him, he disappeared, like smoke. My second encounter with the boy happened 3 months later, on a rainy spring night. I was organizing medications in the nursing room when I heard the sound of small, quick footsteps in the corridor. I went out to check, and there he was, with his back to me, looking through the window that overlooked the hospital's inner courtyard. The rain was falling heavily outside, and lightning illuminated the corridor at regular intervals. I called to him, this time without hesitation. "Hello, little one." He turned slowly, and for a moment our eyes met. His gaze was deep, almost adult, but his smile remained childish and sweet. I tried to approach, but with the next lightning, he vanished. I stood there feeling a mixture of uneasiness and compassion. Who was that child? Why did he continue wandering the hospital corridors? In the weeks following my first encounter with the boy, I began to notice his presence more frequently in the hospital corridors. It was as if, after revealing his existence to me, he had become more comfortable appearing. One night, while organizing medications at the nursing station, I felt a gaze upon me. When I turned around, I saw the boy standing at the door, smiling. When I tried to approach him, he ran down the corridor, his steps making no noise on the vinyl floor. I followed him to the pediatric recreation room, but when I entered, the place was empty. Only a small blue toy car was in the middle of the room, something I'm sure wasn't there minutes before. When I bent down to pick it up, I heard a childish laugh behind me, but when I turned around, there was no one there. The following week, during a particularly busy shift, one of the hospitalized children, a 5-year-old boy named Tomas, asked me who was the other boy who played with him during the night. I felt a chill on the back of my neck hearing that. "What boy?" "Tomas," I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "The boy in blue pajamas," he answered naturally. "He comes to play with me when I'm scared. He says I don't need to be afraid of the doctors, that they just want to help me." Tomas had been hospitalized for only 2 days and had no way of knowing about the ghost boy stories. I asked him what this friend looked like, and his description matched perfectly. Dark hair, 7 or 8 years old, always smiling, and wearing blue hospital pajamas. About a month after my first encounter, I was During the night rounds when the lights in the pediatric ward corridor began to flicker, it wasn't uncommon to have electrical problems in the old hospital, but something about that situation seemed different to me. The lights flickered in sequence, as if someone was running down the corridor and interfering with the electricity. I followed the pattern of lights until I reached a room at the end of the corridor, room 108, which was empty that night. The door was ajar, and when I pushed it, I saw the boy sitting on the bed, swinging his legs. He looked at me with a serious expression different from his usual smile. He pointed insistently at the cabinet in the corner of the room and disappeared. That same week, I began to notice other patterns in the boy's appearances. He appeared mainly on the quieter nights, when movement in the hospital decreased. Sometimes, he appeared only as a reflection in the glass of the windows, a childish face that disappeared when I tried to look directly. On other occasions, I felt his presence even before seeing him, a sudden cooling in the air, followed by that unmistakable feeling of not being alone. Objects in the recreation room frequently changed places during the night. Once, I found all the toys arranged in a perfect circle in the middle of the room, something impossible to happen naturally. One night, while I was checking the vital signs of a patient in serious condition, I noticed the boy standing at the foot of the bed, observing the sick child with an expression of concern. He raised his eyes to me and pointed to the heart monitor. I followed his gaze and realized that the patient's heart rate was dropping rapidly. I immediately called the emergency team, who managed to stabilize the patient in time. If I hadn't noticed that change at that exact moment, we could have lost the child. When the emergency passed, and I looked again at the place where the boy was, he had disappeared, but a childish drawing of a heart had appeared on the fogged window glass. On another occasion, I was stuck in the elevator between two floors for almost an hour. The emergency communication system wasn't working, and my cell phone had no signal. When I was starting to panic, I heard a childish laugh coming from somewhere inside the elevator. I looked up and saw the boy's face reflected in the ceiling mirror. He smiled and pointed to the emergency button. Although I had already pressed it several times without result, I decided to try again. This time the alarm went off, and in a few minutes the maintenance team came to rescue me. When they asked how I had managed to make the alarm work after so long, I didn't know what to answer. The most disturbing episode happened almost 2 months after my first encounter with the boy. I was working the night shift, and the hospital was exceptionally quiet. Around 3 in the morning, I heard the sound of a ball bouncing in the pediatric ward corridor. When investigating, I saw a red ball rolling by itself across the floor, as if someone invisible was playing with it. The ball stopped at my feet, and when I bent down to pick it up, I felt a cold hand touch my shoulder. I turned abruptly, but there was no one there. Then all the lights in the corridor went out at once, leaving me in total darkness. Before I could react, I heard a child's voice whispering near my ear, "Be careful with room 108. It was the only time I heard the boy speak. The following night, an emergency was declared when a fire started in room 108, the same room that the boy had mentioned. Fortunately, the room was empty, and the sprinkler system contained the flames before they could spread. The subsequent investigation revealed that a short circuit in the wall had caused the fire. If the room had been occupied, or if the fire had started a few hours later, when everyone was asleep, the tragedy could have been much greater. As I watched the maintenance team inspecting the damage, I saw the boy in blue pajamas standing on the other side of the corridor, observing the scene. Our gazes met, and he smiled before disappearing once more. At that moment, I understood that for some inexplicable reason, he was trying to protect the children in the hospital. After the renovation of the University Hospital of Monterrey, I was transferred to another healthcare unit in the southern part of the city. The new hospital was modern, with state-of-the-art equipment and an impeccable structure, quite different from the old building where I had worked for so many years. In the first days, I felt out of place in that sterile and impersonal environment, without the familiarity of the old corridors I knew so well, and mainly without the appearances of the boy in blue pajamas that had become part of my routine in the last months. The weeks turned into months, and I gradually adapted to the new reality. I made new friends among colleagues, learn to navigate the gleaming corridors and operate the modern equipment. But something was always missing. Sometimes, when working the night shift, I caught myself instinctively looking at the corners of the corridors, expecting to see a small figure in blue pajamas. Or when I heard a childish laugh coming from some room, my heart would race for a moment, only to calm down afterward, remembering that I was no longer in the old hospital. 2. Weeks later, I received a visit from an old colleague from the university hospital. During coffee, she told me the news, including the fact that, after the renovation of the pediatric oncology ward, the appearances of the boy in blue pajamas had completely ceased. "It's as if he finally found peace," she said. "No one else has. Seen him in the corridors, no child has mentioned an invisible friend. No object has mysteriously changed places during the night." I felt a mixture of relief and sadness hearing that. Part of me hoped that Miguel had followed me, that our connection was special, but another part was happy to think that he had finally found rest. I smiled, feeling a peace that I hadn't experienced for months. I returned the car to its place and said goodbye. As I left the hospital, I had the impression of seeing from the corner of my eye a boy in blue pajamas waving at me from the second-floor window. When I looked directly, there was no one there, but I didn't need to see to know. Miguel was still there, fulfilling his promise to take care of frightened children, now in a more cheerful and colorful environment. And although our paths had separated, I knew that I would always carry with me the memory of those 3 extraordinary months when I met the boy from University Hospital. My name is Ricardo Santos. I'm 36 years old, and I worked as a night security guard at the Church of El Roble in the Obispado neighborhood for almost 3 years. I never believed in ghosts or supernatural apparitions. I was skeptical by nature, and always found rational explanations for the strange noises I sometimes heard during my night rounds. That is until March 14th of this year, when everything changed. I'm writing this account because I need to share what happened to me during the 2 most terrifying weeks of my life. On the first night, I was doing my usual rounds around 11:30 p.m. The church was completely empty and silent. As I passed by the side chapel, I heard a low sound, like a whisper or a contained cry. I thought it might be someone who had been locked inside the church after closing. I followed the sound to the corridor that leads to the main altar. That's when I saw her for the first time. A woman was kneeling before the altar with her back to me. She wore an old-fashioned white dress, long to her ankles. Her dark hair was tied in a low bun. The strangest thing was that I was absolutely certain I had checked that area minutes before, and there was no one there. "Ma'am, the church is closed," I called out, keeping my distance. She didn't respond or move. I approached further, thinking that perhaps she was an elderly person with hearing problems. When I was about 3 meters away, she slowly turned her head in my direction. Her face was pale, almost cadaverous, with deep, dark circles and bluish lips. But it was her eyes that paralyzed me, empty, lifeless, fixed on me with a disturbing intensity. I felt a sudden and intense cold, as if the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in seconds. My flashlight flickered several times and failed. In the brief moment of darkness, she disappeared. She simply vanished without leaving a trace. I searched throughout the church, checking every door, every corner. Nothing. It was as if she had never been there. 2 days later, during my shift, I began to hear footsteps in the upper corridor, where the access to the choir was located. Clear sounds of heels hitting against the wooden floor. I slowly climbed the stairs, illuminating the way with my flashlight. Upon reaching the top, I saw the same woman in white standing by the window looking outside. This time she was less than 2 meters from me. The air around her seemed distorted, like heat waves, except that it emanated an intense cold. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She turned to me, and now I could see that her dress had dark stains. At chest level and on the sleeves, old stains that looked like dried blood. "He will return," she said, in a voice that didn't seem entirely human, low, hoarse, as if it hadn't been used for a long time. Before I could respond, the church lights began to flicker frantically. I looked at the switches on the wall for a second. and when I looked back at her, she had disappeared again. On the third appearance, 2 days later, she was in the confessional. I was making my rounds when I heard the sound of crying coming from there. Upon opening the curtain, there she was, sitting in the place reserved for the faithful. Her hands were crossed on her lap, her long pale fingers intertwined as if in prayer. "What do you want?" I asked, feeling my entire body tremble. She slowly raised her face. A tear was running down her face, not a normal tear, but something that seemed almost crystalline under the dim light. "Justice," was all she said before vanishing into the darkness of the confessional. The fourth time was the most disturbing. It was a stormy night, and the power had gone out. I was in the guardhouse, waiting for the light to return, when I smelled a strong scent of flowers, roses and lilies like those used at funerals. I turned around and she was there, standing in the doorway less than a meter from me. I could see every detail of her pale face, the small bluish veins under the translucent skin, the dark eyelashes framing those empty eyes. "Please, leave me in peace," I begged. She extended her hand toward me, her fingers almost touching my face. The cold emanating from her was so intense that it made me back up against the wall. "You see him too," she said, more of a statement than a question. Then she smiled, a joyless smile that revealed small, perfectly white teeth. When a thunderclap illuminated the guardhouse, she was no longer there. The fifth appearance happened in the crypt. I avoided that place whenever possible, the dark basement below the church where some ancient tombs were kept. But that night, I heard the sound of the crypt door opening, although I was certain it was locked. I reluctantly went down to check. In the center of the crypt, between the stone tombs, she was kneeling, hands covering her face, shoulders trembling as if she were sobbing. When I pointed the flashlight in her direction, she uncovered her face, but there were no eyes, only empty, dark cavities. I screamed and dropped the flashlight, plunging the place into darkness. I ran up the stairs, stumbling several times. When I finally managed to turn on the church lights, I was alone again. The sixth time was during the day. I had gone to the church outside my working hours to pick up a coat I had forgotten the night before. Although it was noon, the church was strangely empty. As I walked down the main corridor, I saw her reflection in one of the stained glass windows, not from the outside, but as if she were behind me. I turned abruptly, but there was no one there. I continued walking, faster and faster, feeling watched. Upon reaching the sacristy, where I had left my coat, I found something on it. A single white rose, withered, with drops that looked like blood on the petals. On the seventh appearance, she spoke to me for longer. I was checking the closing of the doors when I saw her sitting in the last pew of the church. This time I didn't try to run away. Something in me needed to understand what was happening. I approached slowly and sat several chairs away. "Why? Are you following me?" I asked. She looked at me with those empty eyes. "I'm not following you," she replied, her voice sounding like several overlapping voices. "I'm trapped here, as you will be." I felt a shiver run down my spine. "What are you talking about?" She smiled again, that disturbing smile. "You've seen me. Now you can no longer leave." The eighth and final appearance was the most terrible. I was in the sacristy putting away some items when the temperature dropped drastically. My breath formed small clouds in the air. I turned around, and she was centimeters from me, so close that I could touch her. Her face was different. The skin seemed stretched over the bones. Lips retracted in a grimace that revealed more teeth than would be natural. Eyes now completely black, with no visible iris or white. "They killed me here," she whispered, her icy breath against my face. "In this exact place, and you will help me find peace." Her hands grabbed my wrists, and real hands, solid, cold as ice. The moment she touched me, I saw flashes of images. A young woman being dragged into the sacristy, a man in ecclesiastical garments, blood on the stone floor, a body being carried during the night. I pulled my hands forcefully and ran out of the church. The next day, I resigned. No matter how much I needed that job, nothing justified the terror I felt every time I entered that church. The manager didn't seem surprised. "You lasted longer than most," he said, not looking me in the eyes while signing my papers. I asked what he meant by that, and he just replied that it was difficult to keep night security guards at the Church of El Roble. "Especially at your post. That area of the sacristy has a complicated history. That was a month ago. I moved to another city, trying to leave all that behind. But sometimes, when I'm about to fall asleep, I feel that same funeral flower smell, and a sudden cold in the room. And although I try to convince myself that it's just my imagination, I know I'm not alone. I feel eyes watching me in the darkness. The White Lady of Obispado has found me, and something tells me she will never leave me again.